late for this part of the conference. So I won't waste our time explaining, the topic, but it's on the simultaneous rise of China and India and the West. That is why we decided to invite Dr. Adam Quinn, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Science and International Studies here. And we were originally supposed to have Professor David Dunn, who we met this morning, but because he's head of department, and as you can imagine, he has many other priorities, so he could not be here with us. So basically we have Professor Madhu, Professor Kondapalli, Professor Youkang, Professor Callahan, and Adam. And we'll kick off with Professor Callahan. Would you like to?
Okay, yeah. Instead of talking to you for 8 minutes, I'm going to show you a 6-minute video, which is part of a much larger project that I've been doing where I talk to Indians about their first trip to China and Chinese about their first trip to India and to the West and all sorts of things. But it deals with some of the issues that I raised in my paper this morning about people-to-people relations. So hopefully it will work. Yes.
Since our childhood, we had known that there has been a tremendous relationship between India and China. There has been an exchange between these two great civilizations and mutual influence. However, it's also well known that in the recent past, in the last 50 years or so, our contact has been minimal, and we have become strangers to one another. At least from our side, there is a sense of alienation.
I think my first impression, as with everybody who goes to China, especially an Indian who goes to China, was one of astonishment, because I went there actually from New York. I flew from New York. And it was really like going, we think of New York as the big sort of city, the big tall city, and you suddenly arrive in a place and you realize that, this place can accommodate 100 New Yorks. I'm Amitabh Ghosh. I'm a novelist. I've written several books, including Sea of Poppies and River of Smoke. And it was Sea of Poppies really that first led me to China. As I was working on the book, I realized that there was this very strong link between India and China in terms of maritime trade in the 19th century. And the connections that I was exploring was between Calcutta and Guangzhou, and Bombay and Guangzhou. So I went to Guangzhou and spent a month there. It was just a sense of astonishment that even though one had read so much already about all that's happened in China in terms of infrastructure, for about 50 miles you drive through just skyscraper after skyscraper, these amazing freeways and motorways, and the actual reality of it doesn't strike you until you've actually seen it close up.
Why do you dress in sari? Very beautiful. But why do you want to dress in sari?
Because so many Indians dress so beautiful. I want beautiful too.
Oh, would you mind stand up for me so I can help you? Lovely. Yes. Who dressed you? Who helped you dress like this?
3 Indian women.
3?
Yeah. I don't know how. I buy it and I just put this way. So he dressed for me.
Oh, this is so lovely.
Really?
Thank you very much.
What do you think of India?
It's very incredible, I think. So colorful, and maybe the people here are very different from us. So I think it's very interesting. That's why I came here. I see a lot of things. Maybe some I I can't understand. Very so poor, so I can't how to explain my feelings about India, but it's really fascinating.
You can speak in Chinese, and I will have somebody translate it for me.
我觉得印度，蛮有趣的。虽然有时候觉得，可能印度人的话，可能看起来会很脏，然后我们会很不习惯，但是这个地方还是非常有些神秘，然后我不能理解他们对宗教的信仰，但是还是蛮尊重他们。然后，因为这个所有的人在这边的时候都，每个人过来的时候都会我觉得应该。可以适应能力很强的人的话，会觉得这里真的是可以一而再再而三的过来的。如果有机会的话，我会再来一次。I will come again.
The small group of us who were visiting China together to do a project, we were in Shanghai and we thought we'd go and visit Tsering. We decided to take a boat ride. There was, of course, a Chinese boatman. He was all silent, he didn't say very much. 15 or 10 minutes later, suddenly he broke into a song. And then the Vietnamese person in our group, she broke into a song. And this duet began to take place between the two of them. A bit from the Chinese and then something from the Vietnamese, and from the American, and then the Indian, and then the Chinese again, and at the end of it, within half an hour, we were all singing together, and that really created a bond which was really indescribable. I mean, I can't tell you what bonds we forged. We just kind of broke the great wall that existed between at least as I'm concerned, between India and China.
So I guess we should start from here, from Professor Tu. Would you mind? Okay, from there. Okay, the plan is for each of the speakers to make an initial statement of 8 to 10 minutes and then open it up for discussion. So starting with Professor Kondapalli.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. The simultaneous rise of India, China, and the West. It's quite a huge topic, but let me summarize, put across a few points. Now, the rise of any country is seen generally in terms of, as Angus Madison, in his long 2,000 years history of GDP, had focused on. The rise of a country is generally measured in terms of GDP figures. Also, of course, there is the soft power, there is the various factors, various elements included. Angus Madison suggested to the Indians and Chinese contributing to roughly about 56% of the GDP till about 19th century, and then you have the colonial intervention, and now with 21st century, India and China are knocking at the doors of the international community with GDP figures. Today, China is $10.7 trillion GDP and India $2.2 trillion GDP. They are rising in this matrix, yet not a major, kind of factor in the international power structure. This is the crisis. While GDPs are rising, they are not yet a factor in the international power structure. As we see the international power structure in the United Nations Security Council, in the multilateral institutions, in alliances, in Bretton Woods institutions, or in other words, the order that we received at international and regional levels. We have not seen Russia, we have not seen China and India as major figures in this international order as of now in 2014. This is the situation where, as the second largest and ninth largest economies, China and India are contesting this order. Now, we have seen that comprehensive national power became a major indicator to know the position of a country in this 1 to 10 scale, roughly. As you know, this came through the Pentagon's Andy Marshall's office to measure the Russians initially in the Cold War period. Now every country had adopted to the CNP as a category in locating the position of a country in the international power hierarchy. In this, the Chinese constitute about 6 in the 1 to 10 scale and India about 9 in the 1 to 10 scale. The CNP, at the head of the table, you still have US, next is UK, France, Russia, Germany, and then China, and then you have a host of other countries, and in the 9th position, roughly India is at that table. But this is not reflected in the power hierarchy. Of course, we have seen some mid-course correction, and G7 has been expanded to G8 and then now G20, which looks at some of the international issues. But the position of China and India in restructuring the Bretton Woods institutions, especially in terms of voting rights, have not been accorded so far, although 2 years ago there was some measure in looking at the reform of that. So one of the issues that both China and India have been articulating in the BRICS, in the G20, in other fora, is to get into this club at the high table. Having said that, China had not laid down what it wants after it rises, meaning if China becomes number 1 in international economic and political and military and so on and so forth indicators, what does it want? In 1945, United States suggested we want a liberal order in which there is a United Nations, there is a United Nations Security Council, a General Assembly where all member states will participate, there is a UN Charter, and alliances and Bretton Woods institutions, etc., as the architecture, in which the global commons, maritime space, at that point of time we didn't have the cyberspace. The global commons were part of the international legal, subjected to the international legal procedures, where fair play is part of that interaction. However, we do not know what China wants if it becomes number 1, and this is the major key problematic about the rise of China. Does it want every country to have the same position as it is in the United Nations right now? Does it want a Pax Sinica, which doesn't respect the maritime commons as we see now in South China Sea? Does it want a cyberspace where we saw generally across the globe the cyber threats increasing, most of these URLs tracing back to China or to Estonia, or as Snowden had mentioned, the US National Security Council itself doing these cyber attacks. So what does China want in these global commons? How does it regulate these global commons is not clear as of now. So this is a big question mark. It is in the background of several Chinese scholars mentioning about the Middle Kingdom or the revival of the Middle Kingdom. We see China preferring more towards a hierarchical relationship than an equal horizontal relationship that we witnessed in the last 6 decades. So this is a key issue for the international community on what exactly Chinese order desire is looking at. We have some indicators. Yan Xuetung had reflected on this in Tsinghua University. Xi Jinping in the SICA meeting a month ago had reflected to Asia as one of those spheres for China to look at. If those were true, then we see that this is probably not acceptable to all units in the international system. So this is a key problematic with China's rise. What it wants, how does it conduct itself in the international order and regional order? We have seen, as part of the rise of China, a contest emerging between China and the United States. And this contest is reflected in most regions. In Africa, for example, the contest is visible. In South America, the contest is visible. In Asia, we have seen China-US contesting. In Europe as well, we have seen this contest between China and European Union in various spheres. In this contest, or as Organsky had suggested, a power transition, when will be the defender and the challenger clash, if they ever clash? If G2 is the alternative, Brzezinski's G2 is the alternative, then will US give up, as Hillary Clinton mentioned in the 4th Strategic and Economic Dialogue, will US give up the power transition game? Well, she mentioned in a very diplomatically couched language that United States is preparing for the power transition. In what way it is preparing is not clear. But the fact that US is now debating about the power transition in the light of China becoming the second largest economy is a crucial indicator in this power transition aspect. Now, what is the responsibility, what is the relationship between, say, US, China, European Union, India? If you see these as major countries in the CNP categories, what will be the responses of each one of these? We have seen, and especially in terms of India, being an Indian, I would like to explore more about that aspect. We have seen whenever China, US came together, it was a problematic for India. For example, soon after Henry Kissinger's visit and Nixon's visit to Beijing, we have seen the power transition happening between, or rather the debate between Soviet Union and China being decided in favor of China. A kind of strategic transformation took place during Nixon's visit to China. And that was not conducive for Indian interests. For example, we were pushed into the Indo-Soviet Treaty, and a balance of power emerged in the 1970s period. We have also seen when China and US came together in 1998, both passed the 1172 resolution in the United Nations Security Council. And it was not conducive for Indian interests. The role cap eliminate nuclear weapons. While China is in possession of nuclear weapons, while United States is in possession of nuclear weapons, it didn't want India or Pakistan to become nuclear. So we thought it is highly discriminatory because we did not threaten the nuclear weapons with any other country. So the 1998 G2, if you call, if that can be called, 1998 G2 between US and China was also not conducive. When President Obama visited Beijing in November 2009, the joint statement also mentioned about China and US looking after the South Asian security situation. This again is a problematic for India. For example, can you imagine India and US passing a joint statement saying the East Asian security situation will be looked after by India and US. So this will be problematic in many ways. What does it mean for EU, China, India? We did see that there is the trade, investments, markets related issues and human rights related issues were brought up as part of this EU, China, India equation. Finally, I would also like to say this simultaneous rise had resulted in a very uncharted course in the international history, and each China and India are on the highway trying to enhance their own security first. On this path, so since this is a very uncertain, given the background of the Arab uprising, given the background of the Ukrainian developments and the responses, we have seen also a lot of doublespeak from European countries and US on democracy, on human rights, and so on. In the light of this, there is a certain tendency to reduce the risk in the international interactions. So India, for its part, is looking at the reorganization of the United Nations Security Council and also various other bodies. At the regional order, we did see China is trying to become the leader of Asia in many ways, in trade, in soft alliances, and so on. So,
I request you conclude. And
yes. So we saw that the simultaneous rise of China and India is a new phenomena, and in terms of the order that each prefers, there is a substantial divide between China and India, although both are trying to enhance their own reach into the international domain. I would also say, at a minimum, India is looking at assurances on the global commons, maritime, cyber, space related issues, and it is looking at an inclusive architecture and equal distribution of the resources and so on and so forth at the international level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try not to turn the microphone off again this time, like I did last time I was speaking. Thanks very much to Tsering for inviting me and to everyone else for being here. Tsering said in his talk that when people talk about this sort of issue, they tend to be quite US-centric. I am the human face of US centrism who has been brought here to play that role. What I have to say will be quite similar in many ways to what our first speaker has just said, but hopefully I can say it sufficiently differently that you don't feel you've wasted your time hearing it from me as well. I mean, this is an issue that's as rich as the day is long, and therefore you could come at it from lots of different angles and talk for a very long time. But I've got a couple of things that I think it might be worth my saying, and then obviously I can unpack them more if we want to during discussion. One about power, and then the other about, which is slightly longer, about world order. And the implications of changes in the distribution of power within it. The first point, I guess, is about what I think of as the meaning of power and changes in the distribution of it. That is a complicated word. There's a whole sociology and a world of literature about what power means. But I want to make one simple point here, which is that I guess what we have at the moment in the case of both China and India is a significant increase, unarguably, in their wealth, in their share of global wealth. An increase in wealth is not in and of itself an increase in power, it is an increase in wealth. Power, as I think of it, at least as it's functionally useful in understanding the international system, is something that comes from harnessing the wealth that you have in order to apply it for some kind of state purpose. That is most obvious and directly the case in terms of military investment. If you can take some of your national resources and invest it in terms of your air power, your land power, your sea power, your capacity to project and coercive force. But it's also true in other areas, your ability to take your economic relationships with other people and apply them in some kind of focused, state-led way to secure outcomes in other areas. And it's also about your ability to translate the weight that you carry in economic terms into institutional heft and the ability to exercise influence diplomatically within the institutional context that you find yourselves in. And that's a process that I think any state that increases its wealth needs to actively engage with. How do you translate this through strategy into those kind of outcomes? How do you become more powerful on the basis of the increased resources that you have? And my perception at the moment, and I am open to being corrected, but I would say it's probably a broad perception, is that China and India are rather different animals at this stage of the game in terms of how they're translating that, how they're operationalizing that second part of the game. China is very clearly, with its military mobilization program, military modernization program, with the way that it's relating to its neighbors, with its sea territorial claims, with its role in the G20 and its tolerance of the conception of the G2 in popular discourse. It is seeking very self-consciously and clearly to make this step into being a different kind of state power and to take its wealth and turn it into that other thing. India, it seems to me, whether through a different set of intentions or a different set of capabilities or the influence of its domestic politics doesn't seem to be making as focused and direct an effort to translate its increased power into that kind of great power role in quite the same way. I am not an area expert, but certainly the disproportionate attention that's given to China, I think, by the United States reflects the perception that China is pursuing that more focused course. The second point that I wanted to make, I guess, is about order. What I've written down here is order/hegemony/power transition. And I wrote brackets Organsky after that while the first talk was going on. I mean, the current world order, I think it's pretty hard to dispute, is broadly speaking a Western one. By that I mean both that it was constructed by the United States and its allies at the peak of a disproportionate holding of material power in their hands at a certain historical time, but also that it is built around a set of values and ideas and preferences that those powers had, both in terms of economic governance, in terms of attitudes towards sovereignty and its limits, in terms of attitudes towards individual rights and the role of the international system in engaging with those sorts of questions, and questions of economic transparency perhaps to some extent as well. So the question is, to my mind and to many US minds, as the first sense in which the world order is Western kind of fades, which is to say that it stands upon a platform of a disproportionate concentration of power in the hands of Western states, can its Westernness in the second sense continue, which is to say that the extent to which it reflects those values that are broadly speaking emergent from the cultural and political history of the West and around which it was constructed. I mean, in simple relief, there are two perspectives on this. I'm sure that that's a violence of almost obscene simplicity against the real debate, but for the purpose of this it will do. One is a sort of liberal institutionalist perspective, which I guess I would most closely associate John Eikenberry with personally, which suggests that the present world order, the liberal world order, if we want to call it that, has certain specific characteristics which will lead rising powers to tolerate its continued existence in a way that they perhaps wouldn't with other more domineering, more ethnically specific or more imperialist world orders. His particular phrase is that the world order is easy to join and hard to overturn. And that because these powers have been able to rise, become prosperous, gain in influence under this world order, they will nibble about the margins, but they will broadly want it to continue. And in some sense, there is a lasting victory for US interests that comes from that. There is an alternative perspective which suggests that as powers rise, and especially powers with the potential underlying scope of 1 billion people in terms of population, etc., they will find themselves wanting to change not just their level of wealth and influence within the existing order, but elements of the rules of the existing order itself, that they will want it to accommodate their own perceived interests and values in ways that get into the territory of the rules of the game. And that part of the reason why they may want to do that is for considerations of status, that the very fact alone that the world order is seen as being the culturally specific creation of one power at the time of its peak becomes problematic for them no matter how much prosperity they may reap. The idea that you want to have something that is yours and that reflects your preferences simply to prove that you can make that happen becomes an issue. So this leads us to two questions, which is the last thing that I want to say. I think one is, how do rising powers define their interests? Which is to say, do they define their rising interests? Do they define their interests as maximizing their prosperity and their physical security and their influence within the existing order, or do they come to define their national interest as encompassing the kind of status considerations that would lead them to want to assert their right or their prerogative to engage in a managerial role rather than just a membership role within the international order, and indeed perhaps to renegotiate elements of that order to demonstrate their increased influence. And I don't think there's any fixed answer to that, by the way. I think different powers may think about it differently. The same power may think about it differently over the course of time, and the historical evidence is very complicated for who's right and who's wrong, but that is one part of the puzzle. The second question is, how prepared are the established powers to accommodate the demands of new powers for those kinds of renegotiations? Because a fundamental renegotiation of the world order in line with others' preferences kind of goes to the heart of a lot of where US confidence sits at the moment, because if you engage in the decline debate and you talk to Americans, the main thing you will hear is that, yes, it is true that in some crude material sense the United States is declining in terms of its relative power, but that doesn't matter because everyone is locked into a system that reflects US values and preferences and networks, and therefore the United States' interests are secure in the longer term. The greater the extent to which rising powers seek to renegotiate the rules of the game, the less true that is, and the more that the United States' confidence in that analysis of how the future will flow changes. So I suppose the question will be, with both of those prior questions in mind, to what extent, if these rising powers attempt to assert the right within existing institutions to greater say, greater sway, greater centrality, will that be accommodated? Will the existing institutions of world order prove a fit forum for increasing the weight of those powers whose wealth is increasing? Or if that is not able to happen, will they increasingly seek to create other forums, alternative forums, which will reflect their perceived entitlement to a greater say? And if so, you know, we've been through previous periods of world order where rival sets of international institutions vied on that basis, and it wasn't very pretty. So I think it will be a key question for the future, which of those courses unfolds. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, but thank you very much for listening.
That was a lot, actually. Thank you.
I don't know how long I've been talking.
No, but you really covered all the bases, you know. So, okay. I'd like to begin with something that you know, you said at the end, what's at stake in a new world order for India and for China. But before I sort of deal with that question, I just want to raise another question, which is, when we talk about the rise of India and China, are we forgetting that the rise of India and China at the same time creates a disequilibrium in India-China relations to begin with? So we're not actually seeing the same responses from India and China to the changing of the old world order and the beginning of a new world order. I think we have different positions on that, and the different positions arise because of the different value systems that both states have and the different levels of power at which they operate today. So we are actually looking at a very complicated debate on the emerging world order. And not everybody is agreed, India and China or other powers that lie outside on the margins of the present world order, are agreed what the new world order should look like, who should be at the center of it, and who will inform that world order with their values or with their power or with their influence. That's one. The second question I think we want to raise is, how well has the old order worked for the rising powers? And I think the old order has worked rather well for China. I think China's rise would not have been possible if the old order had not accommodated China in many, many ways. That was critical to its rise, critical to its growth, and critical to its integration with the world economy as it stands today. So in a sense, when China grouses about changing the rules of the game, I think you need to ask yourself, I think we need to ask China at least, which rules of which game does it want to change? Or which are the institutions which have not aided China's rise and not aided China's influence in the existing world order? And which are the ones that it thinks are going to actually constrain its further influence? As far as the debate goes on China wanting to change the world order, it seems that, and especially if you look at the IR literature that's coming out of China, which takes on a very realist approach to China's rise to power and to China's influence in the world and the creation of a new world order and the kind of new world order it's going to be, it seems that China's major grouse is against the dominant power of the United States. As long as it can match that power or overtake that power, it will replicate the kind of world order that I think that exists right now. So in a sense, it's a very pessimistic view of what the new world order is going to look like. It doesn't seem to be looking like any different from the existing world order as it is today. What's at stake in asking for a new world order? I think what's at stake is that emerging powers like India and China feel that they need greater representation in existing institutions. The new institutions that they have created, like the BRICS, for example, function very much like the older institutions did at the time of their inception in many ways. It's a meeting of states, for example, in the BRICS, that are at almost the same level of development, that have the same objectives in terms of development, and that seek the same things within the world order in terms of the development and their growth. But in no major way is the BRICS actually refashioning the rules of the game as it stands. The other thing, of course, is how has the West responded to this? While there's been extensive debate on, transition theory, the turbulence of rising states create, et cetera, changes in the world order and challenges to the world order, it seems that there are two major ways in which the West has responded. One is to actually engage the rising powers, and I think China's engagement with the existing world order has been tremendous. In all of the major institutions, global institutions, China has influence, it has presence, it has representation, and it has the ability to put forward its case and persuade people and persuade other members. The other way in which I think the West has responded is to contain China. And in some ways that has happened with a shift of alliances, a consolidation of some alliances, an expansion of some alliances, and a renegotiation on where power should lie and how power should be used vis-a-vis China. We see this, I think, in East Asia with the American pivoting to East Asia. We see this with the reinvigoration of the American-Japan alliance, the expansion of that alliance in terms of the relationship between Japan, Australia, India, Singapore, etc. So in a sense, there is that kind of a power shift that happens at a sub-level, a sub-regional level, that is that's aimed at containing rising powers, and essentially rising powers that are seen as serious contenders to the emerging world order. In both ways, I think these are not extremely threatening or extremely, what should we say, they don't change the existing world order in any significant manner, nor do they allow for major challenges to the existing world order. So for the moment, it seems that the challenge to the world order is mostly rhetorical. The interesting part, of course, is even if you assume for a moment that there are challenges to the world order and that there is a debate, there is a demand to challenge the world order, what exactly do India and China look at when they want to transform the world order? Right? What is, do they want to change the world order? Do they want to transform the world order? And I think essentially what they are looking for is transforming the world order, changing some rules of the game, relaxing some rules of the game, allowing for more space for representation. But nobody today is saying, let's get rid of the United Nations, for example. Let's get rid of the IMF completely. Or let's do, let's just put an end to all the WTO negotiations and agreements that exist. Nobody is actually saying that. So in the sense, we're looking at transformation, we're looking at minor challenges. We are not looking at a major challenge to the existing world order. And there's something that, you said, which I think I completely agree with, that in a sense, I think many countries, including India as a rising power, agree with the essential liberal values of the existing world order. China may not, for the moment, agree with all of those values, but certainly other rising powers and major powers do agree with the liberal values of the existing world order. So in that sense, I don't think that the challenges to the fundamental assumptions of the world order are really serious in any manner. The interesting part, of course, is that, as I said, India and China are rising separately. They're not rising together. And this creates a disequilibrium in their relationship. One of the reasons for that disequilibrium is that China's ideational framework for a new world order is seen as being hierarchical, is seen as being hegemonic, benign hegemonic, as China says, but hegemonic nevertheless. And there is a real apprehension about what China will do with the power it gets when it does get that power. There is very little transparency about that, but the few incidents that we have seen in the recent past do suggest that China will use that power in the interest of maximizing its own influence and its own power. And therefore is going to be much less of a tolerant hegemon than perhaps, I say this at risk of being now completely critiqued, as the US has been. So in a sense, despite all of the criticisms of US policy, overall, over the last 60 years, given the values, liberal values that the US has actually projected, it is at least viewed and perceived as a power that you can engage on at the level of liberal values. You can hold it to, to values of individual rights, to human rights, et cetera, in a broad sense. So in a sense, I think other rising powers and other major powers are not very easy with the sense of a new world order that has China at the center of this world order. The interesting part, of course, is that I think we are wishing away the old world or the existing world order too easily. One of the lessons that the West learned from the demise of the Soviet Union was that perseverance and resilience is a part of power, of state power. That states exist because they are resilient and because they persevere. The Soviet Union was not resilient, it did not persevere, and it disintegrated. And I think that was a huge lesson that was learned. So in a sense, I think even as the US declines, I think the whole discourse on the revival of US power is a very significant discourse. Finally, I think we need to remember that GDP as a measure of state power is a chimera. GDP can be calculated in many ways, and essentially it's not really a reflection of how prosperous people in the state are, how satisfied and what kinds of livelihood people in the state have. India's GDP has risen, but India still has large numbers of people under the poverty line. China's GDP comes nowhere close to the OECD levels of GDP in European countries. So we are actually looking at India and China as still two large developing countries with huge sectors of poverty within these countries. And I think we need to take caution from this because I think we pronounce the passing of the old order too soon. The old order isn't yet over. I think the fact that the West still has claims to superior technology, to innovation, to large amounts of material wealth, that the US, while its economy is in slowdown, is still the largest economy in the world. The gap may be closing, and yet the average levels of livelihood for average US citizens are way beyond those for Chinese citizens, should I think caution us in the kinds of ambitious claims that we make for the creation or for the coming of a new world order. Thank you.
I should thank Dr. Topgyal again. Two reasons. First, I was invited to come here, and I have a lot of opportunities to listen what the Western and Indian scholars say about the simultaneous rising China and India. And the second, I think he spent a lot of time to design the topic in 3 different sessions. I think the key words is the simultaneous rising of China and India. But in the morning and in this afternoon, I just maybe they just focused on the rising of China. Not, so I think next time maybe we should talk more about the rising of India. This afternoon, I think I should mention that comparing with the rise of the other major powers in modern times, China and India's rise has different characteristics. First, influence. The U.S. National Intelligence Council believes that the rise of China and India is comparable to the other world's major power in modern times, thinking that China and India will play the roles of world major power. With equal important significance, like the rise of Germany in 19th century and the rise of the United States in the early 20th century. It needs to be emphasized that, unlike Germany and the United States, that achieved the rise at a different time and in different regions, the rise of China and India occurred in the same period and the same continent. Furthermore, the rise of China and India is under the context of globalization. Their share of the total global populations is far above Germany and the United States. So I believe their rise results in a more profound impact on human society. The first. Second is non-Western property. Since the world entered modern history, the Western powers has dominated the international system of the political, economic, monetary, military, and other fields. China and India are ancient civilizations. The two countries gained independence and liberation in late 1940s. They did not follow the Western models of development, but developed according to their own national conditions, thus going on the way to liberalize their own country. Today, China and India has stabilized the political system. Their economies continues to grow rapidly. They pursue an independent policy on foreign affairs and safeguard the national sovereignty with their own strengths of military. In the Western dominated international system today, China and India, as two major emerging powers, are bound to have many common interests and have similar or common views on many international issues, with similar or common attitude and positions. So, peaceful rise. As early as in 1950s, China and India jointly initiated the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, given the current international system, which has not hindered the peaceful development of China and India. The two countries have chosen the way different from other powers which achieved their goals to rise as the big powers through wars. So those countries choose a different way. Of course, both China and India try to get the gradual changes in international order. I think after the India's independence, and the founding of the new China, the two Asia giants were not actually involved in the designing of the post-war international order, but had to get used to it, while having their own views, attitudes, and positions. But anyway, they believe so far the international orders is not to some extent, it's not just or is unfair, but they just want to see it's a gradual change. It's not a rapid change. Because what I just mentioned, because in this international orders, the both countries realize that they are rise in the process of rising. So they will want to see that. And meanwhile, I would like to say something. I still have some time.
5 minutes.
Okay. Just I mentioned in this morning, with the rapid development of China and India, some Western scholars, on the basis of the power transition theory, speculated that the rising of emerging powers would have a huge impact on the existing international order, challenge the leading countries of the international system. However, the process of their rise has so far shown that the two countries contribute a lot to the stability of the current international system. Number one, contribution to Asia's century. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because everyone will be very clear. With the economic growth of China and India, and actually they opened their markets to the whole Asia region. And then now China become many Asia countries' biggest trade partner. And China opened its market to those countries. And India too. And India signed some agreement with the South Asia countries and opened its market to a lot of South Asia countries. And even during the financial crisis, and I think that both countries' fast developed economies contributes a lot to make Asian economy stable and restored. Therefore, it's quite reasonable that with the rise of China and India, there appears Asia-centric. More and more information and medias. Think of it. Without the rise of China and India, who can talk about the Asia society, Asia-centric? Second, significance for international system. The simultaneous rise of China and India has global significance in the contemporary international system. At first, the rise of China and India is a milestone in the development of human civilization. China and India are two ancient civilizations. Currently, they are the two largest developed countries with more than 1/3 of the world population. China and India acceleration on social and economic development and consciously implement of UN Millennium Development Goals has resulted in the rise of living standard of 2.6 billion people and lift hundreds of millions of them out of poverty, which is the major contribution towards peace and development and to the stability of international system. Secondly,
Conclude in 1 minute.
oh, okay. Actually, I have a lot of points. That's okay.
We have time, during
Oh,
the
yeah,
Q&A
yeah, okay.
to develop your points.
Yeah. So actually, this is a significance for the international system. So that points. And the third, I would like to say some significance for the world in transition. Maybe if we have time, I will talk it later. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Between the Professor Callahan's movie and the different statements, you covered a lot of themes and raised a lot of questions. And I'm sure you have all the questions as well. So would you like to raise your hands and ask your questions?
Or make comments.
Yeah, or make comments as well. But, please make your comments as short as possible.
I'm Jas Randhawa, a sixth form student. I forgot your names, but the two men either side. Could you just tell me which country you think has better standards for workers?
Did you ask?
Who are the two people?
The two men on each side.
It's a men on each side.
No, it's in.
Kondapalli and-
Yeah.
Well, if you're looking at the wages and so on, I think the Scandinavian countries are the best. I would say the social welfare benefits to the workers and so on, they are the best. The worst, I would say China. The workers in China are the worst in terms of their exploitation of wage labor. And this is done partly because of the global supply chains and the MNCs and so on and so forth. We keep hearing that the Chinese workers spend 14 to 15 hours. And I trace back the 19th century Manchester, where you had similar experiences. Today, the workers in China are not even allowed to commit suicide. From one building to the other, in Foxconn and others, they have these nets placed so that they don't even commit suicide. So the worst is actually Chinese workers in terms of their wage labor and welfare. The best is Scandinavian countries.
I think China is quite a big countries, and different places have different conditions. But generally, the working conditions are getting better and better, and most workers get more and more income than before, much more than before, and they also enjoy a lot of rules, which is decided by the People's Congress. And in the long run, I think you can find the Chinese products will be getting more and more expensive. And why? Because the workers get more and more wages, much more than before. And also, I think the Chinese People's Congress also passed through the labor laws about on the working conditions, and I think it still need to put more contents inside it yet. And so I believe their work condition will be getting better. Thank you.
Yes, please.
You know, when you consider the conditions of labor in China, you have to break it down into casual labor, gender, labor in state organizations, state-owned enterprises, and labor in what were essentially SEZs and private enterprises. And I think the standards for all of these are different. The worst, I think, is casual labor, young women employed in low-skill, assembly line, low-wage industries, where there are no backups for health, there are no backups in terms of free time, where wages are consistently low, and where, as in 19th century Britain and the United States in its textile industries, female wage labor is expected to work for a few years and then go back to the villages or take up domestic duties after they get married. So there is this whole transitional group of women who actually get the worst possible deal, and they actually have no representation. They are managed by contracts, labor contractors, and they are actually work in compounds where they have very little space for any kind of individual activity. So I think you need to look at that. But as he said, the state, because of civil society interventions, has in the more recent years passed labor legislations actually determining minimum wage labor, but that really applies to state-owned enterprises rather than to private enterprises.
Yeah, sorry. I'm also a sixth form student, and I'm just really impressed you haven't mentioned at all the 4 Asian tigers. I was just wondering how the tigers, who were a very important economic growth during the 1970s and 60s, have changed or did change the relationship between China and India, or have nowadays.
The 4 Asian tigers, how do they affect China's rights? Taiwan, South Korea, or how do they affect China's rights?
Those countries, those regions. I think now those countries and regions are our neighbors, and generally they developed earlier than China's rise, and then I think they applied invest a lot of funds in mainland to help the China to develop. And meanwhile, and with the rise of China, and also China opened the markets to Japan, South Korea, and other countries, South Asia, East Asia countries. And I just mentioned, and perhaps China's, most of them, the biggest trade partner before. And I think in the globalization area, those countries, especially in these regions, they should pursue some kind of regional integrations, and because they are stay close, and they know each other, and they also share almost the same cultural background, and they can help with each other, and even during the financial crisis in several years ago, and they even set up a kind of a system. They can help with each other. They put a lot of money in these mechanisms. They don't rely on international monetary fund and the World Bank. They can save them by themselves. This happened in 2008 and 2009. That's why the U.S. worried about that, because they were cooperated with each other. 10 plus 1, 10 plus 3, and also 3, Japan, China, and South Korea cooperated with each other. They don't rely on U.S. anymore at that time. So U.S. is worried about that. So they have some kind of a policy called pivot to Asia. They want to turn back again. They realized after 9/11, they spent too many times on anti-terrorism. That's why they want to put forward the rebalance of power, rebalance strategy. That's why, to some extent, there are so many problems, so many issues now happened around China. Thank you.
Okay.
Should I say
You want
something?
to add something?
I'm going way off my reservation here in terms of actual full-on expertise, so forgive me, but I guess my thought, one thought that occurs would be this, that, I mean, with something as complex as the change in the distribution of economic capacity in the world that's ongoing right now, there are lots and lots of causes for the rise of the rest, etc. But one of them is clearly domestic to the countries in question, to China and India. That is to say, there was a strategic, political, social decision made to change the way that they went about the project of developing their economies after a period of several decades in which they did a whole other thing that, depending on your priorities, at least by ours, wouldn't be said to have worked terribly well. And I think that one of the functions that those tiger economies fulfilled was to provide a kind of stark counterpoint in terms of the level of economic development that was achieved, individual prosperity, modernization, etc., which presented a series of difficult questions, increasingly difficult questions for the governments of India and China to answer. Now, there were many political and ideological reasons why they weren't about to pivot 180 degrees and go, oh, well, if that makes you richer, then clearly that's the right thing to do. But over time, it would seem that the kind of things that the government of China began to implement after 1979 were learning a lot of lessons, I think, from what went on in that part of the world. Now, the issue, of course, is that in those countries, after a certain interval, the economic prosperity that they began to enjoy was followed up by a whole range of political pressures for domestic reform and what were dictatorships steadily, or at least very closely controlled political systems, steadily moved towards more pluralistic systems in which various interests and middle-class pressures were allowed to flow through a democratic-like system. That is, of course, everyday business in India nowadays. That is very much a nightmare scenario from the point of view of the Chinese government, which for many very good reasons is worried about instability and the consequences of uncontrolled rapid change, etc., etc. But the challenge that China has at the moment is how to continue to replicate the economic successes of those countries without producing the same kind of political pressures, or at least without managing those political pressures in a way that it results in the same kind of outcome, because that's not what they want. And of course, because the population's prosperity is spread much more unevenly, the consequences of a sudden democratization would be different and perhaps spectacularly unpleasant.
Thank you. Ashley Townsend, Oxford Uni. I have three questions here. They're short, if that's all right. The first is actually specifically for Professor Bhalla, and that is, in your last presentation, you said that it's unclear at the moment how China will choose to use its power in the future should it acquire more, but the sort of track record to date is not encouraging, in that you suggest they may seek to maximize power to defend their own national interests. I'm just curious what your case studies or which issues you're thinking of. There are examples of China trying to maximize its selfish national interests as it acquires more power. The second two questions are for the panel. The first is, a few of you spoke about China, India maybe trying to change or tweak the rules of the game, the international system as it stands. It brings to mind the whole discussion about EEZs and intelligence and maritime operations within countries' exclusive economic zones. And the reason I bring this one up is that there's been a bit of slippage on all sides. China obviously has maintained a position that it doesn't tolerate, without forewarning, foreign country intelligence operations within their national EEZs. However, reports last year from the US Navy suggest that China has actually been conducting those maritime operations off Guam and Hawaii. The Indian Navy has also been, US Navy says that the Indian Navy has been using the same arguments, the same as China, to prevent China and other navies in the region from entering into its EEZs in the Bay of Bengal for the same reasons. And again, according to US Navy information, not only India and China share this view, but as you suggested earlier actually today, Vietnam, Myanmar, but also Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and around 20 countries in total share this view. Now, that's clearly a tweaking of the rules of the game, of the rules of the international system as it stands, but how might we move from one set of rules to another, what are the scenarios that people might have in mind for that sort of change, or are there others of similar magnitude? And then finally, and very briefly, we haven't spoken today much about Chinese or Beijing's perception of vulnerability in the international system, which is something, perhaps because we've been mainly focused on China-India relations through the morning, but it strikes me that there is, again, some connection between the China-US vulnerability equation and the India-China South Asian influence equation. And you might follow that down to actually see a Pakistan, India, China, United States chain of vulnerability. So how might this also affect both Chinese and Indian perceptions of the future of South Asia?
Thank you. Yes?
I think there was a question in there that I could answer. So it's about the transition from one world order to another, and I also study world orders, or Chinese conceptions of world orders, and that's what is largely missing from these discussions. They're usually very broad and general about Tianxia or Wang Dao, the kingly way, and how China is good and America is bad and la la la, but there's very rarely, if ever, any sense of how you get from here to there. And I guess that's what raises concerns among people in various regions. Professor Du said something that I think I have to respond to, because he said that China has not been involved in the design of post-war institutions, and that's totally incorrect. Roosevelt was very clear about including China in the UN system, in designing the Bretton Woods system. So just because it's not your China, it's not the PRC, it was the existing China at that time. And that, I think, is something that was it was quite radical. He had to argue against the British, who didn't want to include China at all. So it was quite a progressive thing, and I think we should recognize that the rules of the game have been including China from the very beginning. Who wants to go next?
Just very quickly on, how do I see China maximizing power in relation to its own security interests and its own power? Just the modernization of its military capabilities, I think, is a very good example. Because when China modernizes and raises its military budgets, it actually creates a huge security dilemma in the region. Not just for the United States, which then is concerned about China's military modernization, but I think for all peripheral countries. And China has rarely ever given any assurances to its neighborhood, its periphery, and its coastal neighbors that its military modernization is necessary or is aimed not at creating power that will then upset the power calculations in the region. Now, logically, it really can't say that, because military modernization, military expansion normally goes hand in hand with trying to change, the power hierarchies in some credible way. But the way in which China defines both its military strategy as well as draws up its military budgets also indicates that it has ambitions far beyond its current needs for security. And I think that's a very good example of how, quote-unquote, careless China has become in terms of persuading its Asian neighbors about its good faith in the region. Much more narrowly, I think what it did with with the Philippines recently, just stop buying bananas from the Philippines, was almost destroyed an agricultural sector in the Philippines economy. The rare earths dispute it had with Japan was another very good example of how it chooses to use its power when it has it to actually pressure states, which it can pressure, without any consideration of the long-term consequences of this for China's own image in the region, which it thinks it can manage by just the accretion of power to itself.
Thanks. I'll say one thing, I guess, if I can, about vulnerabilities. I'm not sure if I'm going to come at this question the way you had in mind, but I'll try and say something interesting all the same. Specifically with looking at China, I think thinking about Chinese vulnerability, if we mean China's ability to hold its current territorial its current territorial whole without threat from outside. I mean, I think the external threats to China's current territory are almost zero, so its vulnerabilities almost don't exist in that sense. If it is to be vulnerable to external conflict, then I would think that would only arise as a result of some adventuristic effort to assert a larger territorial claim which spirals beyond their control. But I think if I understand the mindset of those who govern in Beijing at the moment correctly, and who does really, but to the extent that I do, I think the end game that they are most fearful of is that in the presence of any kind of slowdown in their current runaway economic growth, or even in the absence of such a slowdown, they have a very difficult job on to maintain domestic stability. And the largest vulnerability that they perceive, I guess, is twofold. First of all, that their ability to keep a stabilizing hand on the many domestic forces that are bubbling up their slips, and that should the surface layer of stability crack within China, that there is then a vulnerability that opens up to, whether real or purely in their own minds, to some kind of external interest in their affairs. Now, China is very dogmatically opposed to any kind of international community engagement in resolving disputes within other sovereign territories. Wherever there is an argument about whether or not any kind of major, meaningful, material intervention should happen, they tend to be found on the side of opposition to it. That is to some extent based around a principled belief in the principle of national sovereignty and so on, but I can't help thinking that one of their sort of longer-term concerns is that they don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they will one day find themselves on the end of a contemplation on the part of external powers about whether a level of disorder is broken out there that justifies some kind of intervention. That seems very far away from the world we live in today, but I don't think it's so far away that it's completely absent from their minds. So if we're talking about principles of world order and how a rising China plays into them, one of the trenches they seem to be digging is opposition to interventionism, especially with regard to resolving any kind of internal civil political conflict. Whereas the United States, of course, presumably because it never imagines any circumstances under which it might be on the other end of one, tends to be much more open-minded about those sorts of things. I think that's likely to become an increasingly sharp point of focus over the years to come. And it stems partly from a perception of their own vulnerability. Again, I'm not an area expert, so asterisks all over that, but that is a thought that I had.
Anybody else?
On Indian perceptions of the South Asian futures, quite a huge thing, but I think currently, probably in a short to medium term, what concerns India is the spread of the Taliban in the region and the post-ISAF situation in Afghanistan. That's short to medium term as the troops gets reduced this year. That's the immediate focus. Of course, there is a lot of regional coordination on this issue. Iran, Tajikistan, Russia, China, India, all these countries are coming together on what should be done in the post-ISAF situation. Of course, nobody is clueless what to do in Afghanistan, especially if the new government in Kabul is not able to tackle the rise of Taliban. And since we have already the TPP in Pakistan, the Taliban presence is spreading, this is a major concern. So in terms of the South Asian futures, especially at the short to medium term, that's the vis-a-vis Pakistan, India, China, and United States, as you mentioned, I think that's the focus area. And the regional states think that this could be a kind of problematic in the medium term, short to medium term. But nobody has any clues on tackling such an issue.
Professor Professor, when I mentioned the international order, design of the international order, actually I say since India's dependence and the founding of the new China, it's a different concept. Because at that time,
before 1949, China's participation.
Yeah, I understand. You mentioned President Roosevelt. He is the one to arrange it for the Asia order at that time. But after the founding of the People's Republic, China, everything's changed. So it's different. So, Professor just mentioned the Chinese military expenditure seems quite high, right? But I think if we look at the history, look back to the history, in the modern times, China was invaded again and again by the foreigners, including West countries and Japanese. Just after China carried out the opening policies, reform and opening policies, we spent a lot of money on the economic development. But now, we have more and more invest to the military areas. I think it's understandable. I just mentioned the history. I think Chinese people would like to see the army to safeguard China's sovereignty and territory. But meanwhile, everything, I think the price is going up very fast. Imagine the house price in China. If we want to see the retired officers and the soldiers, when they come back from the army, they also need money to buy the house. So that means they need a lot of this kind of funds to improve their lives, even in the army. So we cut a lot of money on these areas. Imagine that. Even the Navy, India so far has 3 aircraft carriers already, but in China, we only got 1. It's just half, without airplane on it yet. So generally, China's military strength is still not very strong. It still needs to develop. It still needs more money in these areas. I think if you look at the internet, some Chinese people that write on these issues, they support the government to spend more money in this area. But as scholars, I think we should make some kind of a balance in this area, in economic development and military expenditure. But so far, I believe Chinese government has done very well. They try to make this kind of balance. If we spend too much money in this military expenditure, that means our economy will be suffered a lot. But such a kind of things never happened in last 3 decades. I think it's my argument.
Thank you. One more question.
My question is mainly directed at Dr. Adam Quinn, and my question links to 3 countries, United States, China, and India. Just as the China theory is going around in the United States, I think that the belief that the United States is hell-bent on containing China's rights is also widespread in China. And the United States pivot to Asia strategy is, of course, widely believed to be an example of the U.S. contain of China's rights. And my question is that what do you think the United States would like the India's role to be in this pivot to Asia? And so far, how successful do you think that the United States has got what it wants the India want to be, to act? Thanks.
So we'll get a few more, just 2 more questions.
Sure.
Okay, so unsurprisingly, I'm sure Adam will think I've got a question about energy security. So it came up a little bit earlier today, but I just want to know what all of you think in terms of what role energy security is going to play in India-China relations in the future. So both in terms of, I mean, they both have massively growing energy needs. I think India as well as China definitely, and I'm sure India as well, very heavy coal reliance too. And in both countries, you have this kind of both national and regional resources of energy being particularly stretched. So do you think energy is going to be an area where they can actually cooperate, or is it going to be an area where conflict is a bit more likely, or is it going to be neither?
At this point, I'm going to abuse my position and ask what is probably the last question. However we describe it, China and India are rising simultaneously, which means just rising together at the same time, not necessarily cooperatively or harmoniously. So my question is, because I don't want to sort of second guess anybody's knowledge, is for the whole panel. Is there any sort of historical precedence of a system, the same system, whether it's the global system or a regional system, having to confront 2 rising powers at the same time, and what sort of lessons can the Western countries, principally America, for example, draw from that sort of historical precedence in terms of engaging with China and India? What challenges and what kind of opportunities are there rising from this rather unique situation of 2 rising powers from the same region? So, that's it. Anybody?
Okay, shall I kick off, seeing as I'm holding the microphone? Good. With regard to the first question about Chinese containment, I mean, it's funny what's going on at the moment, in the sense that the Chinese seem to have fallen head over heels in love with John Mearsheimer, the offensive realist of University of Chicago of some renown, whose whole analysis of this situation is based upon the overriding importance of changing capabilities and the relative lack of importance that can be given to intentions, which can change in a much shorter period of time. And his basic gist would be that inevitably, as China rises, it will seek to maximize its power, or at least assert its power in ways that are contrary to anything that's considered acceptable by the powers in its way, and that the United States is misguided if it imagines that this rising power is going to simply be a participant in the world order of its original creation. So in a weird sort of way, it's an American guy who seems to be doing a lot of the intellectual legwork in convincing the Chinese to be more hard-nosed than they might otherwise be. You know, in terms of whether or not that's representative of the broad American perspective, and I think the American perspective is much more mixed. I think that, like, if I had to say where is the broad balance of opinion within the United States policy discourse, I'd say it probably leans much more towards the Eikenberry perspective, which is that there is at least a realistic possibility that China can be made a responsible stakeholder within the existing institutions, but you need to hedge against that taking steps that leave you still in a position to do something about it if they start to go the other way, and perhaps even to encourage them to go that way by making it clear that it's not going to be an open door to push on to go the other direction. Hence the United States' increasing interest in shoring up its relationship with all of the countries in the immediate environment of China. As regards how India plays into that, I really am going too far to make any claims that I know anything about US policy towards India, but the general sense, I think, is a perhaps slightly naive one, almost stemming from the fact that India is democratic and has some kind of shared cultural heritage with Europe, that their rising power is just less worrying in some way. Now, their power is less focused and less targeted and less likely to produce a war with an equivalently powerful neighbor. So that's one reason why it worries them less. But there is some kind of crypto-imperial legacy sense in which India is seen as being an existing member in good standing of the liberal international club in a way that China is perhaps not seen yet. That would be my intuition, and therefore the hope would be that a powerful India is all to the good of US policy. With regard to the second question that was asked, quickly, if I had to try and think of an example, the one that springs to my mind, which I'm doing a little bit of work on at the moment, is the world order that existed prior to 1914, which was, it would be wildly misguided to claim that Britain dominated it in the same sense that the United States dominates the current world order, because material power wasn't that disproportionate. But it was a world order based broadly around a set of diplomatic understandings and economic institutions that reflected British dominance, and within that Germany was rising, the United States was rising, and to some extent Japan was rising and Russia was rising as well. Obviously that's not an example that's going to fill many people with a sense of optimism and glee about how these things pan out. So I guess the advice that I would give would be cautionary rather than like that people should copy it. It would be that you would be surprised how quickly what seem like small things can escalate and get out of hand. So I would advise people to be not complacent about the idea that small fights they pick about stuff just for the sake of it can stay contained, because one of the first things you learn about World War I when you read that history is that there were very few people who got into the arguments that ultimately spiraled into that conflict who had that as their knowing end game, and things took on a life of their own. And the second thing is that to the extent that there were people who were thinking that way, some would argue that the German military apparatus was quite knowing in what it was doing. It's that once a state becomes caught up in conceptions of status, once it becomes determined to demonstrate its own prerogatives and rights and superiority, you would be amazed at how far beyond the threshold of what we would consider a rational calculation of your interests they are prepared to go. There is no way anyone was coming out of a conflict in Europe with more money or a happier polity or any of the things that John Eichenbree would tell you is the national interest. But the national interest is a multi-interpretational concept. And if the most important thing is to assert your superiority, then you will absorb any manner of costs to do that. So if any country starts to look like it's starting to think in that way, that is the time to start buying your tickets to Antarctica, I think, because it's a very worrying trend. Sorry? If available by that time.
Can I suggest something else? I think the example that we could actually look at where the world order changed because of the rise of new powers would be the rise of Spain and Portugal and the end of the decline, and the beginning of the decline of India and China. And I mean, that was a long space in time. And we are actually looking at the evidence of decline by the 17th century for India and China. But really, I think the rise of Europe, and in particular beginning with Portugal and Spain, in a sense, within the world system, spoke to the decline of an old order. The interesting part, of course, is that it happened over huge spaces of time and space. So it wasn't telescoped into the kind of events that we saw in Europe beginning the First World War. And so the damages of it from historical perspective seem a little bit less. But if you look at the economic decline of India and China in the 17th century, and then the misery that sort of ensued as a consequence, the breakup of the states within these two countries over the 17th century to the 20th century, I think, and if you calculate the misery of that, I think it would be incalculable. So I think that within the world system sort of view, that really would be perhaps the apt example of the rise of two powers and the decline of an existing world system.
Anybody else?
Because I just mentioned in the early presentation this afternoon, I think the rise of China and India has their own characteristics comparing with the other countries' rise. So I also stressed that their influence, their rise of the influence on international system and international community is much more important and significant than any other countries, just in my personal views, in the long run way, because there's 2.6 billion people there. So generally, I think those countries share a lot of common interests, and also they will follow the rules of the international order now. I think they will try to change some rules which is not unfair and is not just to some extent, step by step, little by little. They don't want to see a sea change of or overthrow this kind of international system, no. So basically, the rise of, peaceful rise of those two countries is most in accordance with their national fundamental interests. Thank you.
I think it is incorrect to say that US is trying to contain China. Let me take you back to Tom Donilon's statement, the former NSA of the United States. He pointed 5 issues in the US rebalancing. One, he said, retaining the leading position of the United States in the international system. Number 2, strengthening the alliances, which basically in Asia means Japan, South Korea, and in an extended format to Singapore and Philippines. Philippines more in counterinsurgency rather than an alliance formation. With Singapore, of course, there is the base, naval base and so on. Third, he said constructive and cooperative partnership with China. Constructive and cooperative partnership with China. That's very important. The US rebalancing includes number 3 as constructive and cooperative partnership. It also includes strengthening of relations with friends and partners. These so-called friends include India and other countries. Number 5, Tom Donilon also mentioned that the economic restructuring or economic structure needs to be strengthened, reformed, which includes basically Trans-Pacific Partnership and a host of other. So in none of these, there is the containment of China. Meeting with Xi Jinping and previously with Hu Jintao, Obama said, we welcome the rise of China. And it's quite obvious with over $500 billion trade and $1.2 trillion of Chinese investments in the US Treasury securities. I don't think U.S. is trying to rock the boat with the Chinese on the international system and contain China with huge consequences. In other words, what U.S. is communicating is China is not the Soviet Union. With Soviet Union, there is the Enemy Act of 1917, which blockaded any trade. With China, there is nothing. In fact, trade is bubbling between both U.S. and China. And so I think the idea of containment, of course, these were expressed by Chinese to have some more leverage with the United States. These have been mentioned by various Chinese scholars and policymakers to enhance the bargaining power. But I think there is the G2, Brzezinski's idea of G2, which everyone else is concerned with. I don't think there is the containment of China by the United States. On the second question on energy related, indeed China had become the second largest, and by 2017 it's supposed to become the largest importing country in the world. Last year they imported 280 million tons of oil, mainly coming from the Indian Ocean region, from the Middle East and Africa. West Asia contributing 56%, while Africa contributing some 24% of this imports. India had also become the largest, and we are now importing 79% on the energy bill. We spend that much amount, some $145 billion a year on the import bill. So both India and China as the largest importers of energy resources, I think there is this idea that consumers need to come together so that they can bargain with the producers, the OPEC countries and so on. But that did not really work out. We had a 2005 MOU between India and China on the energy cooperation, but it didn't really work out, and there is a lot of competition actually. For example, in Kazakhstan, an Indian company was trying to bid, and that was outbid by a Chinese with rumors about corruption and whatever in the bidding process. In other countries as well, we saw a mixed response in the energy question. So it didn't really work out, the MOU on cooperation in the energy field. Although we still have the idea of cooperating, because both India and China consume huge resources, energy resources. And so that idea came up. And we did some projects in Sudan, in Angola, in Iran. But Iran became a problematic after the nuclear dimension came up. And we had to reduce from 24% to about 14% the imports from Iran. The Chinese were also subjected to the same as the Iranian nuclear issue was hotting up. And the P5+1 put restrictions on everyone, including on China, on the energy imports from Iran. So we had those issues as well. On the last question on two rising countries, not in the same region, but I think in Japan and Germany provide for this example of two rising countries, one in Asia, one in Europe, in the 1930s. And the responses were almost similar in terms of the Pearl Harbor and the operations in Europe.
Can I say just a couple things? I'm glad you mentioned Mearsheimer, because I heard an interesting story last week from one of his friends that Mearsheimer, whenever he goes to China now, the first thing he says when he's giving a speech is, "It's always nice to come home." And so he's not coming home because he feels Chinese, he's coming home because this is where realism lives. And I don't think you're suggesting that Mearsheimer somehow converted Chinese strategists to realism. No, there's just a lot of resonance there. The problem with that is that a lot of my Chinese colleagues think that Mearsheimer is speaking for the US government, which is just not the case. The reason why he's so loud is because he's not being listened to by the US government. And he wants to be listened to more. I guess I'll just say something about Tsering's question. I don't think it's really that important. I guess I'll just say you're asking the wrong question, and to be rude to my host. I don't think it matters anymore in our global political economy if two rising powers are from the same region or not, because territory doesn't matter that much anymore. I also wonder whether a historical precedent is that helpful, except if you're going to say that the thing that history teaches us is that we can't predict the future. So I would, I guess, caution against trying to find some analogy, some historical analogy about the rise of India and China, because not only is there not a good analogy, but I don't think a good analogy matters. I think it's a completely new situation.
I think, anybody else want to add anything? Yeah, I think we have to vacate this hall. By 6, we would need time. So I think we have come to the end of the roundtable, unfortunately. Sorry for disappointing you. I would like to end by thanking, some people and organizations. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers for coming all the way from India, China, and from various parts of the UK, and also maybe from outside Greater Birmingham. So for such a scintillating three panels. I would also like to thank the Department of Political Science and International Studies here for providing funding for this conference, as well as for providing a friendly space for myself, for my research. Especially, I would like to thank Julie Gilson, who is not here, for being such a great colleague and mentor, and who initially encouraged me to organize this conference, and also helped me get part of the funding. I also would like to thank and acknowledge the College of Social Sciences India Travel Fund, who provided part of the funding, and also the University of Birmingham India Travel Fund, which made it possible for these two Indian scholars to come here. And I would also like to acknowledge the China Institute, which is part of the International Relations unit of the university, for providing funding, as well as this banner and the back and other stuff. I would also like to thank Sandra, who is the PA to David Dunn, our head of department, for helping me with tea, beverage, and other stuff. And also Edward Lee, and also Chandrachur and Amrit, who helped me on a number of tasks in relation to this conference. I should also thank Sarah and Anurag for coming in for the filming project. So with this, I would like to they don't look very nice, but some mementos to all the speakers. I was just debating whether to give something humorous or something practical, and I went for the practical.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, thank you very much. And I must say there will be dinner at 7 at Lucas House for all the speakers at 7. Thank you very much.